The woman stumbled into Gila Bend with dust coating her split lips and terror still alive in her hazel eyes, her calico dress torn at the shoulder where rough hands had grabbed her. And when she collapsed against the water trough outside the saloon, the rope burns around her slender neck told a story that made every man who saw them want blood. Zachary Yates had been loading supplies onto his wagon when he heard the commotion, his tall frame straightening as people gathered around the fallen woman. He pushed through the small crowd with the easy authority of a man who had earned respect through deeds rather than words, his sun-weathered face hardening as he took in the sight before him. The woman could not have been more than 22, with auburn hair that had come loose from its pins and skin that had once been pale but now bore the marks of the merciless Arizona sun. But it was the raw, angry burns circling her throat that made something cold and deadly settle in his chest. He knelt beside her, his strong hands gentle as he helped her sit up. "Easy now," he said, his voice low and steady. "You are safe." Her fingers flew to her neck instinctively, and she flinched at her own touch. Zachary pulled his canteen from his belt and offered it to her, waiting patiently as she drank with desperate gulps. When she finally lowered the canteen, her eyes met his, and he saw the kind of fear that came from looking death in the face. "Who did this?" The question came out before he could stop it, and his voice went deadly quiet, each word precise and sharp as a blade being drawn from its sheath. The woman opened her mouth, but only a hoarse whisper emerged. Her hand went to her throat again, and tears began streaming down her dirt-smudged cheeks. Doc Morrison pushed through the crowd then, his medical bag in hand, and Zachary reluctantly stepped back to let the older man examine her. But he did not leave. He stood there with his arms crossed, watching as the doctor gently tilted her chin to better see the injuries. "Rope burns," Doc Morrison confirmed grimly. "Recent. Someone tried to hang her or came damn close to it." He looked up at the gathered crowd. "Someone get Martha. This young lady needs proper tending, and she needs it in private." Zachary found himself speaking before anyone else could. "Bring her to my ranch. My mother died 2 years back, but her room is still there. She will have privacy and safety." Doc Morrison studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, Zach, help me get her into your wagon." The woman did not protest as Zachary lifted her carefully, mindful of her injuries. She weighed hardly anything, as if she had not eaten properly in days. He settled her in the back of his wagon on a bed of empty feed sacks he quickly arranged, then climbed up onto the driver's seat. Doc Morrison followed in his own buggy, and together they made the 3-mile journey to the Yates Ranch. The ranch house was solid adobe, built to withstand the brutal summer heat and the occasional winter cold that surprised newcomers to the territory. Zachary carried the woman inside and laid her on his mother's old bed, which still bore the quilt she had stitched over countless evenings. The room smelled faintly of lavender from the sachets that hung in the wardrobe. "I will need hot water and clean cloths," Doc Morrison said, already opening his bag. "And some of that salve your mother used to make if you still have any." "I have some," Zachary confirmed. His mother had taught him her remedies before the fever took her, insisting that a man living alone on a ranch needed to know how to tend both animals and himself. He had never imagined he would be using those skills on a woman who had nearly been lynched. While Doc Morrison worked, Zachary heated water on the stove and gathered supplies. He could hear the doctor's gentle murmuring from the bedroom, though he could not make out the words. When he returned with a basin of warm water and clean rags, the woman was sitting up slightly, her back propped against pillows. Someone had removed her torn dress, and she now wore one of his mother's old nightgowns that Doc Morrison must have found in the wardrobe. "This is salve made from comfrey and calendula," Zachary explained, handing the small jar to the doctor. "My mother swore by it for burns." "Smart woman, your mother," Doc Morrison said, accepting the jar. He applied the salve with practiced care while the woman bit her lip against the pain. When he finished, he wrapped clean bandages around her neck, loose enough not to choke but secure enough to protect the wounds. "There. You are going to be sore for a good while, miss, and talking is going to hurt, but you will heal." The woman nodded, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. She reached out and grasped the doctor's weathered hand, then looked past him to where Zachary stood in the doorway. Her lips moved, forming words that came out as barely a whisper. "Thank you. You just rest now," Doc Morrison said kindly. He stood and gestured for Zachary to follow him out of the room. In the main living area, he kept his voice low. "I gave her some laudanum for the pain, so she will sleep soon. Someone did this deliberately, Zach. This was not an accident or a close call. Those burns suggest she was in that noose for some time." "Do you know who she is?" Zachary asked, his jaw tight. "Never seen her before today, but I would bet money she is running from something or someone." Doc Morrison packed his instruments back into his bag. "Are you sure you want to take this on? Whoever did this might come looking for her." Zachary looked back toward the bedroom door. "Then they will find me waiting." The doctor studied him with knowing eyes. "Your father would have said the same thing. Just be careful, son. Arizona territory is not as lawless as it was 20 years ago, but that does not mean justice always prevails." He picked up his bag and headed toward the door, then paused. "I will check on her tomorrow. Send word if her condition worsens." After Doc Morrison left, Zachary stood in his quiet house and tried to make sense of what had happened. The woman sleeping in his mother's bed was a complete stranger, yet someone had tried to kill her in one of the cruelest ways imaginable. He thought about riding back into town to ask around, but he did not want to leave her alone, not yet. Instead, he set about preparing a simple supper, though he had little appetite. He was stirring a pot of beans when he heard a sound from the bedroom. He quickly moved to the doorway and found the woman awake, her eyes wide and frightened in the lamplight. "It is all right," he said softly. "You are still at my ranch. You are safe." She relaxed slightly, though her hand remained at her throat. She looked around the room, taking in the simple furniture, the cross on the wall, the photograph on the dresser of a stern-looking couple he knew must be his parents. "Are you hungry?" Zachary asked. "I have beans and cornbread, nothing fancy, but it is warm." She nodded slowly, and he helped her sit up, piling pillows behind her back. He brought her a plate with a small portion, not wanting to overwhelm her stomach if she had not eaten in a while. She ate slowly, carefully, each swallow clearly painful. When she finished, she set the plate aside and looked at him with those haunted hazel eyes. "I am Zachary Yates," he said, settling into the chair beside the bed. "This is my ranch about 3 miles outside Gila Bend. You are safe here and you can stay as long as you need." She opened her mouth, but the words came out as a barely audible rasp. Zara Taylor." "Zara," he repeated, committing the name to memory. "Do not strain yourself. You can tell me what happened when you are ready, when it does not hurt so much to talk." But she shook her head, determination flickering in her eyes. She pointed to the nightstand, and he realized she was asking for something to write with. He quickly fetched a pencil and some paper from his desk, and she began to write in a shaky hand. "My husband, James Taylor, he tried to kill me." Zachary felt that cold rage settle in his chest again as he read the words. "Your husband did this to you?" She nodded, and more tears came. She wrote again, her hand steadier now. "He gambled away everything, our farm, our money. I told him I was leaving. He said if he could not have me, no one would. Put a noose around my neck, threw the rope over a beam in the barn. I was standing on a crate. He kicked it out from under me. Jesus, Zachary breathed, the word more prayer than curse. How did you get away? Her hand trembled as she wrote. The rope was old. It broke. I ran. Walked for 2 days, did not know where I was going, just away. Where was your farm? Near Tucson, about 70 miles east. Zachary sat back in the chair, trying to process everything. 70 miles on foot through the Arizona desert would have killed most people, especially someone who had nearly been hanged. The fact that Zara Taylor had made it to Gila Bend alive spoke to a strength he had not expected. He might come looking for you, Zachary said quietly. She met his eyes and wrote one word. Yes. Then we will be ready. He stood, his decision made. Get some rest now, Zara. We will figure out what to do in the morning. She reached out and caught his hand, her grip surprisingly strong. When he looked down at her, she mouthed 2 words. Thank you. Zachary nodded and gently squeezed her hand before leaving the room. He spent the night in his father's old chair in the main room, his rifle across his lap, watching the door and windows. He dozed fitfully, jerking awake at every sound, but no one came. Morning brought harsh sunlight, and the realization that his life had become infinitely more complicated. He went about his usual chores, feeding the horses and checking on the small herd of cattle that grazed on his land, but his mind kept drifting back to the woman in his house. When he returned, he found her standing in the kitchen, wrapped in his mother's old robe, staring at the cold stove. You should be resting, he said, setting down the bucket of milk he had gotten from his cow. She turned to him, and he saw that some color had returned to her cheeks. She pointed to the stove, then to him, then to herself, her meaning clear. She wanted to help. You do not have to earn your keep, Zachary said. You are a guest. But she shook her head stubbornly and moved to the stove. Over the next hour, despite his protests, she managed to prepare a breakfast of eggs, bacon, and biscuits that tasted better than anything he had cooked in months. They ate together at his small table, and he noticed that swallowing was still difficult for her, but she managed. After breakfast, she wrote on the paper he had left on the table. I can cook and clean. Let me be useful. You need to heal first, Zachary argued. Healing does not mean helpless. She wrote the words with firm strokes, and he found himself almost smiling at her spirit. Fair enough. But you take it easy, understand? She nodded, and something that might have been a smile ghosted across her lips. Doc Morrison came by that afternoon as promised. He examined Zara's neck and pronounced that she was healing well, though it would be weeks before the burns fully disappeared. He also brought news from town. A man came through Gila Bend this morning, the doctor said quietly, speaking to Zachary outside while Zara rested. Asking about a woman matching her description. Said his name was James Taylor and his wife had gone missing. He seemed real concerned. I bet he did, Zachary said coldly. Did anyone tell him anything? Most folks who saw what happened yesterday are not stupid. They told him they had not seen anyone matching that description. But Zach, he is staying at the hotel. He is not leaving town yet. Good, let him stay. If he comes here, he will regret it. Doc Morrison put a hand on Zachary's shoulder. I know you mean well, son, but think this through. He is her legal husband. In the eyes of the law, he has rights. The law did not see what he did to her neck, Zachary said flatly. I did. The doctor sighed. Just be careful. That is all I am saying. After Doc Morrison left, Zachary found Zara in the main room, holding the photograph of his parents. She looked up at him questioningly, and he crossed the room to stand beside her. My mother and father, he explained. They homesteaded this land 30 years ago when Arizona was even rougher than it is now. My father died when I was 20, thrown from a horse. My mother followed 2 years later. Fever. Zara touched his arm gently, sympathy in her eyes. She set down the photograph and picked up her paper and pencil. You must miss them. Every day, Zachary admitted. But they taught me well. My mother especially. She was the strongest person I ever knew. Came out here from St. Louis as a bride and never complained once about how hard it was. She would be proud of you for helping me. The words, written in Zara's careful script, made something warm uncurl in his chest. I hope so. She never could stand by when someone needed help. They spent the rest of the day in a comfortable routine. Zara insisted on mending some of his shirts that had been sitting in a basket for weeks, and Zachary worked on repairing a section of fence that had come loose. It felt strange to return to the house and find someone there, to smell cooking that was not his own simple fare, to see a feminine presence in the rooms that had been empty for so long. That evening, as they ate supper together, Zara wrote a question that had clearly been on her mind. Why are you helping me? You do not know me. Zachary set down his fork and thought about how to answer. My father used to say that a man is measured not by what he does when people are watching, but by what he does when no one would know the difference. You needed help. I could provide it. That is reason enough. Most men would not risk trouble with another man's wife. You stopped being his wife the moment he put that rope around your neck, Zachary said, his voice hard. Marriage is supposed to be a partnership, not ownership. My parents taught me that. Zara's eyes shimmered with tears, but she blinked them back. She wrote again, her hand shaking slightly. I was 17 when I married him. I thought he loved me. For a while, maybe he did. But then the gambling started and the drinking, and he became someone I did not recognize. How long were you married? 5 years. 5 years of watching everything fall apart. You are 22 then, Zachary calculated. He was 26 himself, old enough to have known his share of heartbreak but young enough to still believe in possibilities. She nodded, then wrote, How old are you? 26. Been running this ranch alone for 2 years now. It must be lonely. He could not deny that, so he just nodded. Sometimes. But I keep busy. The work does not leave much time for thinking about what is missing. They fell into silence after that, but it was not uncomfortable. Zachary found himself watching Zara as she carefully ate her stew, noting the way the lamplight caught the auburn in her hair, the determined set of her jaw despite everything she had been through. She was beautiful, but it was more than that. There was a resilience in her that called to something deep in his soul. Over the next few days, they fell into a rhythm that felt natural despite its newness. Zara's voice slowly began to return, first as a painful whisper, then as a raspy murmur. She still wrote most things down, but being able to speak even a little seemed to lift her spirits. Zachary taught her about the ranch, showing her how to gather eggs from the chickens, and where he kept his mother's herb garden, now overgrown but still producing. Your mother knew plants, Zara said one morning, her voice still rough but clearer. They were kneeling in the garden together, pulling weeds from around the sage and lavender. She learned from a Mexican woman who lived near here when they first arrived, Zachary explained. Said that knowing how to heal was just as important as knowing how to work the land. She was right. Zara sat back on her heels, studying him. You are like her, I think. You have healing hands. The words made something flutter in Zachary's chest, but he tried to ignore it. Zara was here for safety, nothing more. She was running from a husband who had tried to murder her, and the last thing she needed was another man complicating her life. But that did not stop him from noticing the way she smiled when she successfully baked bread in his temperamental oven, or how she hummed tunelessly while washing dishes, or the way her eyes lit up when she saw the sunset over the distant mountains. It did not stop him from lying awake at night, listening to her soft breathing from the room down the hall, and feeling something he had thought long dead stirring in his heart. On the 5th day, everything changed. Zachary had ridden into town for supplies. leaving Zara at the ranch with strict instructions to stay inside and keep his rifle close. He had just loaded his wagon when he saw a man coming out of the hotel, and every instinct he had screamed danger. James Taylor was shorter than Zachary had expected, with thinning brown hair and a build that had once been strong but was now going soft around the middle. But it was his eyes that made Zachary's blood run cold. They were flat and calculating, the eyes of a man who saw people as possessions rather than partners. Zachary watched from across the street as Taylor spoke to the sheriff, gesturing emphatically. He could not hear the conversation, but he could guess the content. When Taylor finally walked away, Zachary crossed to speak to the sheriff himself. "Afternoon, Zach," Sheriff Tom Brennan said, tipping his hat. He was a fair man in his 50s who had kept order in Gila Bend for the better part of a decade. "Sheriff, I saw you talking to that man, James Taylor." Brennan's expression grew guarded. "You know him." "I know his wife, or rather the woman he tried to hang." The sheriff's eyes widened. "So she is at your place. I suspected as much, but I was not going to say anything unless asked directly. Taylor is demanding I search the surrounding ranches. Says his wife is mentally disturbed and a danger to herself." "That is a lie," Zachary said flatly. "I saw the rope burns around her neck, Sheriff. Doc Morrison did too. That man tried to kill her and she ran for her life." Brennan rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. "Problem is, Zach, legally he has rights as her husband. Even if what you are saying is true, and I believe it is, the law does not make much distinction for domestic matters." "Then the law is wrong." "Maybe so, but it is still the law." The sheriff studied him carefully. "You are getting involved in something complicated here, son. Are you sure you want to do this?" "I am sure," Zachary said without hesitation. "That woman has been through hell. I am not letting her go back to the man who put her there." "All right, then. I will do what I can to slow things down, but Taylor is not going to give up. He strikes me as the kind of man who does not like losing what he considers his property." Zachary's hands clenched into fists, but he forced himself to stay calm. "Thank you, Sheriff. I appreciate any time you can buy us." He finished loading his supplies and headed back to the ranch, his mind racing. He needed to figure out a way to keep Zara safe, and that meant more than just keeping her hidden. It meant finding a permanent solution, and there were precious few of those available to a woman trying to escape her husband in 1885. When he arrived home, he found Zara standing on the porch with the rifle, her face pale but determined. She lowered the weapon when she recognized him, relief flooding her features. "I heard horses," she said, her voice still raspy. "Thought it might be him." "Not yet," Zachary said, climbing down from the wagon. "But he is in town, Zara. He is looking for you." Fear flashed in her eyes, but she squared her shoulders. "Then I should leave. I cannot put you in danger." "You are not going anywhere," Zachary said firmly. He took the rifle from her and set it aside, then took both her hands in his. "We will figure this out together. I promise you, Zara, I am not letting him take you back." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Why are you doing this? You barely know me." "Because it is the right thing to do," Zachary said. Then, because he could not hold the truth back any longer, he added softly, "And because in the few days you have been here, you have made this house feel like a home again. Because I wake up looking forward to seeing your face. Because when I think about you leaving, everything inside me rebels against it." Zara stared at him, her hazel eyes wide with shock and something else, something that looked like hope. "Zachary," she whispered. He released her hands, suddenly embarrassed by his confession. "I am sorry. You do not need that burden on top of everything else. I just wanted you to know that you are not alone in this." But Zara stepped closer, reaching up to touch his face with trembling fingers. "It is not a burden," she said softly. It is the first good thing that has happened to me in 5 years." Zachary covered her hand with his own, marveling at the rightness of her touch. "Then stay, please. Let me help you through this." "I am still married to him," she said, anguish in her voice. "The law sees me as his wife. Then we will change that. There has to be a way to end a marriage when one person tries to kill the other. We will find it, Zara. Together." She nodded, and he pulled her into his arms, feeling her trembling against him. He held her carefully, mindful of her injuries, and promised himself that he would do whatever it took to keep her safe. That evening, they sat together at the table and tried to come up with a plan. The problem was that divorce was difficult in Arizona territory, requiring proof of adultery, abandonment, or extreme cruelty. While attempted murder certainly qualified as extreme cruelty, they would need witnesses, testimony, and a judge willing to hear the case. All of that would take time, and time was something they did not have much of. "What if we went to Tucson?" Zara suggested. "There are lawyers there, proper courts. Maybe someone could help." "That is 70 miles, and it is where Taylor might expect you to go," Zachary pointed out. "Plus, it could take weeks or months for a case to be heard." They sat in frustrated silence for a while until Zachary had an idea. "What if you got an annulment instead of a divorce?" Zara looked up, hope flickering in her eyes. "On what grounds? Fraud, maybe." If Taylor misrepresented himself during the courtship, or if there was some other deception, the marriage might be declared invalid from the start. "He did hide his gambling from me at first," Zara said slowly. "And he told my father he owned the farm outright when really it was mortgaged." Would that be enough? It might be. At the very least, it is worth exploring. Zachary reached across the table and took her hand. "Tomorrow I will ride to see a lawyer in Phoenix. It is about 50 miles north, but I know a man there who might be able to help." "That is too far." "You would be gone overnight." "I can make the journey in a day if I push hard and get an early start. I will be back by tomorrow evening." Zara looked frightened but determined. "All right, but I am coming with you." "Zara, it is too dangerous." "If Taylor finds out we are gone, then he finds an empty house," she interrupted. "I am not staying here alone, Zachary. What if he comes while you are away? What if something happens to you and I am sitting here not knowing?" He could see the panic building in her eyes and knew she was right. Leaving her alone would terrify them both, and she had already proven she could handle hardship. "All right," he agreed. "We will go together, but we leave before dawn and we do not stop for anything except to rest the horses." They spent the evening preparing for the journey, packing food and water and extra clothes. Zachary loaded his rifle and his revolver, praying he would not need either, but knowing it was foolish to travel unarmed. When everything was ready, they tried to get some sleep, but Zachary lay awake in his father's chair, watching the windows and listening to the night sounds. Around 3 in the morning, he heard a soft footstep and looked up to find Zara standing in the doorway of her room. She wore his mother's nightgown, and her hair hung loose around her shoulders, gleaming in the faint moonlight. "Cannot sleep?" he asked quietly. She shook her head and crossed the room to sit in the other chair near him. "I keep thinking about what happens if this does not work. If the lawyer says there is nothing we can do, if James has legal rights and I have to go back." "That is not going to happen," Zachary said firmly. "I will not let it." "You cannot promise that. The law, to hell with the law," he said, his voice low and fierce. "If the law says a man can try to murder his wife and then demand her back, then the law is broken. I will take you to California if I have to, or Mexico, or anywhere else you want to go, but you are not going back to him." Zara's eyes filled with tears. "You would do that? Leave your ranch, your life, for someone you barely know?" Zachary leaned forward, taking both her hands in his. "Zara, I know this is too soon. I know you are not ready to hear it, but I have to say it anyway. These past days with you have meant more to me than the last 2 years alone. When I look at you, I see strength and courage and a kind of light I thought I had lost when my mother died. I do not know if what I am feeling is love yet, but I know it is the beginning of something that could be, and I am not willing to lose that without fighting for it. A sob escaped Zara's throat and she pulled her hands free to cover her face. I thought I would never feel safe with a man again. I thought James had destroyed that part of me. But when you look at me, I do not see ownership or possession. I see respect. I see partnership. And that terrifies me because I want it so much. Zachary moved from his chair to kneel beside hers, gently pulling her hands away from her face. Then let yourself want it. Let yourself heal. I am not asking you to love me back right now, Zara. I am just asking you to give this a chance. Give us a chance. She looked down at him, her hazel eyes shining with tears and something else, something that looked like the first fragile stirrings of hope. Then she leaned down and pressed her lips to his, a kiss that was soft and tentative and tasted of salt and promise. When they pulled apart, Zachary rested his forehead against hers. "We are going to get through this," he whispered. "I swear it." They stayed like that until the first gray light of dawn began to creep through the windows. Then they rose and prepared for the journey ahead. The ride to Phoenix was long and hot, the September sun beating down on them as they followed the wagon road north. They pushed the horses as hard as they dared, stopping only to water them and rest briefly in whatever shade they could find. Zara proved to be a skilled rider, keeping pace with Zachary without complaint, despite the roughness of the journey. They spoke little, saving their energy for the ride, but every so often Zachary would glance over at her and find her looking back at him, and the warmth in her eyes made everything worthwhile. They reached Phoenix in the late afternoon, dusty and exhausted but still determined. The town was larger than Gila Bend, bustling with commerce and growth. Zachary led them directly to the office of Thomas Webster, a lawyer who had helped his father with land disputes years before. Webster was a tall man with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He listened carefully as Zachary explained the situation, his expression growing graver as he examined the fading rope burns on Zara's neck. "This is attempted murder, plain and simple," Webster said when they had finished. "The problem is proving it. Mrs. Taylor, would you be willing to testify in court about what happened?" "Yes," Zara said without hesitation, though Zachary heard the tremor in her voice. "Whatever it takes. And you are certain you want to pursue an annulment rather than a divorce. The grounds are more restrictive." "I want that marriage erased," Zara said firmly. "I want it declared as if it never was. He does not deserve even the acknowledgement that we were truly married." Webster nodded approvingly. "All right then. Based on what you have told me about his misrepresentation of his finances and property ownership, we might have grounds for fraud. It will not be easy, and we will need testimony from your father or whoever else was present during the courtship. But it is possible." "My father died 3 years ago," Zara said softly. "But his partner in the general store might remember, and there were neighbors who knew about the mortgage on the farm. That could work. I will need to do some research into recent case law, but I think we have a fighting chance." Webster pulled out paper and began writing notes. "I will draft a petition for annulment and file it with the territorial court. In the meantime, Mrs. Taylor, I strongly suggest you do not return to Gila Bend. If your husband finds you before we have a court order for protection, he could legally compel you to return to him." Zachary felt his stomach sink. Where should she go? Ideally, stay here in Phoenix. There are boarding houses for women and you would be close to the court. Webster looked between them shrewdly. "But I suspect you two have other ideas." She is staying with me, Zachary said firmly. At my ranch, I can protect her there. That could damage the case, Mr. Yates. If Taylor's lawyer argues that his wife has been living with another man, it could undermine her credibility. Then we will deal with that when it comes, Zachary said. But I am not leaving her alone in a strange city where Taylor could find her just as easily. Webster sighed but did not argue further. All right, but be discreet and be prepared for this to get ugly. I will send word to Gila Bend when I have the paperwork ready. With any luck, we can get a hearing within a few weeks. They left Webster's office as the sun was setting, both exhausted but feeling more hopeful than they had in days. Zachary found them a small hotel where they could rest before making the return journey, securing 2 separate rooms to preserve propriety. But after they had cleaned up and eaten a simple supper in the hotel restaurant, Zara knocked softly on his door. "I do not want to be alone tonight," she admitted when he opened the door. "Too many thoughts in my head." Zachary stepped aside to let her in, knowing it was probably unwise but unable to deny her anything. They sat together on the small settee in his room, and she leaned against his shoulder with a sigh. "Thank you for today," she said softly. "For everything. I know this is costing you time and money you probably cannot spare." "The ranch will still be there when we get back," Zachary said, wrapping an arm around her. "And there is nothing more important than making sure you are safe and free." "When this is over," Zara said hesitantly, "when I am no longer married to him, what happens then?" Zachary tilted her chin up so he could look into her eyes. "Then you decide what you want. If you want to leave to start fresh somewhere far from here, I will help you. If you want to stay in Arizona but build a new life on your own, I will support you. And if you want to see where this thing between us might go, I will be right here, waiting." "I already know what I want," Zara whispered. "I want what we have had these past days. I want to wake up and see your face. I want to work beside you and build something good and true. I want to fall asleep knowing I am safe and cherished. I want all of that, Zachary, if you are willing to give it." He kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly, trying to pour all his feelings into the connection between them. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "I am willing," he said roughly. "God, Zara, I am more than willing." They spent that night together, though they did nothing more than hold each other. It was enough to lie tangled together on the narrow bed, listening to each other breathe, knowing that whatever came next, they would face it together. The journey back to Gila Bend was slower, both of them exhausted from the previous day's hard ride. They stopped more frequently, and Zachary found himself memorizing small details about Zara, the way she laughed when his horse tried to steal her hat, the focused expression she got when she was thinking hard about something, the way she sang softly to herself when she thought he could not hear. They arrived back at the ranch in the early evening to find everything as they had left it. No sign that Taylor had been there, no indication of disturbance. They cared for the horses together, falling back into the easy partnership they had developed, then went inside to prepare supper. "It feels like coming home," Zara said as she stirred a pot of stew. "I know I have only been here a week, but this place feels more like home than anywhere else I have lived." "That is because it is your home," Zachary said, coming to stand behind her. He rested his hands on her shoulders, feeling her lean back against him. "For as long as you want it to be." They ate supper together, talking about small things: the garden that needed attention, the fence that still needed repair, the chickens that had mysteriously stopped laying while they were gone. It was domestic and comfortable and perfect in its simplicity. Later that night, as Zachary walked Zara to her bedroom door, she caught his hand and pulled him into a kiss that left them both breathless. "Stay with me," she whispered against his lips. I do not want to sleep alone anymore. Zara, we should not. You are still married, and if anyone found out, I do not care, she said fiercely. I am not asking you to make love to me, not yet. I am just asking you to hold me, to let me fall asleep feeling safe. Can you do that? How could he refuse? They lay together in his mother's old bed, Zara curled against his chest and Zachary's arms wrapped protectively around her. It was innocent and intimate all at once, and as he listened to her breathing even out into sleep, Zachary knew he was completely and irrevocably in love with her. The next few weeks passed in a strange limbo. They worked the ranch together during the day, falling into routines that felt like they had been established over years rather than days. Zara proved to have a talent for working with the horses, and she spent hours in the corral teaching a young gelding to accept a saddle. Zachary found himself stopping in his work just to watch her, marveling at her patience and skill. They received word from Webster that the annulment petition had been filed, and that a hearing was scheduled for early October. They also received a warning. James Taylor had hired a lawyer and was contesting the annulment. He claimed that Zara was a lying adulteress who had run away with her lover, and he was demanding not only that she be returned to him, but that Zachary be charged with alienation of affection. "What does that mean?" Zara asked, her face pale as they read Webster's letter. "It means he is trying to sue me for stealing you away from him," Zachary explained, his jaw tight with anger. "It is an old law, not used much anymore, but it is still on the books." "This is my fault," Zara said miserably. "I have brought nothing but trouble into your life." "Stop that," Zachary said firmly, taking her hands. "You brought yourself into my life, and that is the best thing that has happened to me in years. Let Taylor try whatever he wants. We have the truth on our side." But as the hearing date drew closer, Zachary found himself worrying more. What if the court sided with Taylor? What if they declared that a husband's rights superseded evidence of abuse? What if they decided that Zara's residence at his ranch constituted proof of adultery, regardless of the actual innocence of their relationship? The night before they were due to leave for Phoenix and the hearing, neither of them could sleep. They sat together on the porch, watching the stars wheel overhead, and Zara finally spoke what was on both their minds. "If the court rules against me, I will not go back to him," she said quietly. "I will run again, even if it means leaving everything behind." "You will not have to run alone," Zachary said. "I meant what I said before. If we have to leave Arizona, we leave together." Zara turned to look at him, the starlight reflecting in her eyes. "You would really give up everything for me? Your ranch, your home." "This ranch is just land and buildings," Zachary said. "You are what makes it home. Besides, my parents taught me that some things are more important than property. Family, love, doing what is right. Those are the things that matter." Tears streamed down Zara's face. "I love you," she whispered. "I know it is too soon. I know I am still a mess from everything with James, but I cannot hold it in anymore. I love you, Zachary Yates, and I do not know what I did to deserve you coming into my life." Zachary cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs wiping away her tears. "You survived," he said simply. "You were strong enough and brave enough to run from a man who wanted to kill you. You walked 70 miles through the desert. You refused to give up or give in. That is what you did to deserve this, Zara. You fought for your life, and now I am going to fight for our future." They kissed under the stars, and for the first time there was no hesitation, no holding back. When Zachary finally pulled away, both of them were breathing hard. "When this is over," he said roughly, "when you are free of him, I am going to marry you properly, with a church and a preacher and everyone we know as witnesses. And then I am going to spend every day for the rest of my life making you happy." "Yes," Zara breathed. "Yes to all of it." They left for Phoenix at dawn. both dressed in their best clothes and carrying the weight of everything that was about to happen. The hearing was scheduled for 10 in the morning, and they arrived at the courthouse with Webster just before the appointed time. James Taylor was already there, standing with his lawyer in the hallway. When he saw Zara, his face twisted with anger and something uglier possessiveness. He started toward them, but Webster stepped between them smoothly. "I would advise you not to approach my client, Mr. Taylor," he said coolly. "That is my wife," Taylor snarled. "I have every right." "You have no rights at the moment except those granted by the court," Webster interrupted. "Now I suggest you and your counsel wait inside." Taylor's lawyer, a thin man with a calculating expression, pulled his client away, but not before Taylor locked eyes with Zara. "You are mine," he hissed. "You will always be mine." Zara flinched and Zachary moved closer, his presence solid and protective. "You are safe," he murmured. "He cannot hurt you here." The courtroom was smaller than Zachary had expected, with wooden benches and a raised platform for the judge. They took their seats behind Webster while Taylor and his lawyer sat across the aisle. The judge, a stern-looking man named Harrison, entered and called the proceedings to order. What followed was one of the most grueling experiences of Zachary's life. He had to sit and listen while Taylor's lawyer painted Zara as an unstable woman who had abandoned her marriage vows for an illicit affair. He had to watch Zara on the witness stand, reliving the horror of that day in the barn, her voice breaking as she described how the rope had burned her throat and how she had been sure she was going to die. Webster was brilliant, methodical, and relentless in his questioning. He produced affidavits from the neighbors in Tucson who had witnessed Taylor's gambling and drinking. He called Doc Morrison to testify about the extent of Zara's injuries. He brought in the sheriff from Gila Bend, who stated under oath that Taylor had been asking about his wife in a manner that suggested pursuit rather than concern. But it was Zachary's testimony that seemed to shift the mood in the room. He described in detail the moment he had first seen Zara, the rope burns vivid and fresh around her neck. He talked about her fear, her pain, and her desperate courage. And he looked directly at Judge Harrison and said, "I have known my share of cruel men in my life, Your Honor, but a man who would try to hang his own wife is beyond cruelty. That is pure evil, and no law, no marriage vow should protect that kind of evil." When all the testimony had been heard, Judge Harrison called for a recess to consider his ruling. The wait was agonizing, stretching for over an hour while Zachary, Zara, and Webster sat in the hallway. Taylor and his lawyer waited at the other end, and occasionally, Zachary could feel the man's hateful stare boring into him. Finally, they were called back into the courtroom. Judge Harrison looked tired and grim as he shuffled through his notes. "This court has heard testimony regarding the petition for annulment brought by Mrs. Zara Taylor," he began. "The facts presented paint a disturbing picture of a marriage marked by deception, financial irresponsibility, and ultimately, attempted murder." Taylor's lawyer started to object, but the judge held up a hand. "I have examined the evidence regarding Mr. Taylor's misrepresentation of his financial situation during courtship, and I find it sufficient to establish fraud. More significantly, I have seen the medical testimony and photographic evidence of Mrs. Taylor's injuries. No husband who truly loved his wife would inflict such harm." Hope began to bloom in Zachary's chest, but he did not dare believe it yet. "Therefore," Judge Harrison continued, "this court hereby grants the petition for annulment. The marriage between James Taylor and Zara Taylor is declared null and void, as if it never existed. Furthermore, I am issuing a restraining order. Mr. Taylor, you are not to come within 100 yards of Miss Taylor, as she should now be called. If you violate this order, you will be jailed. Do you understand?" Taylor leaped to his feet, his face purple with rage. "You cannot do this. She is my wife." She is not your wife," the judge said coldly. "Not anymore. And if you continue to disrupt these proceedings, I will have you removed in chains. Sit down, Mr. Taylor." For a moment, Zachary thought Taylor would attack someone. The man's hands were clenched into fists, his whole body trembling with fury. But his lawyer grabbed his arm and forced him back into his seat, whispering urgently in his ear. Judge Harrison looked at Zara with something like kindness. "Miss Taylor, you are free to go. This court hopes you will find peace and safety in your new life. You have shown remarkable courage in coming forward." Zara was crying openly now, her hands over her mouth as if to hold in sobs of relief. Zachary pulled her into his arms, not caring who saw, and she clung to him like he was her only anchor in a storm. They left the courthouse as quickly as they could, Webster walking with them to ensure Taylor did not try anything. Outside, in the bright Phoenix sunshine, Zara finally let herself break down completely, sobbing against Zachary's chest while he held her and murmured reassurances. "It is over," he kept saying. "You are free, Zara. You are finally free." When she had cried herself out, she looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes and a smile that was pure joy. "I am free," she repeated wonderingly. "I am not married to him anymore. I am not his property." "You were never his property," Zachary said firmly. "But yes, now the law agrees with that fact." They stayed in Phoenix one more night, this time in celebration rather than fear. Webster joined them for dinner at the hotel restaurant, and they toasted Zara's freedom with glasses of wine. The lawyer seemed genuinely pleased with the outcome, though he warned them to be cautious. "Taylor struck me as a man who does not accept defeat gracefully," Webster said. "The restraining order should keep him at bay, but be vigilant. If he violates it, contact the authorities immediately." "I will keep her safe," Zachary promised, and Webster nodded as if he had never doubted it. That night, after Webster had left, Zachary walked Zara to her hotel room door. She unlocked it but did not go inside, instead turning to face him with an expression that made his heart race. "I do not want to sleep alone tonight," she said softly. "And this time I am asking for more than just comfort." Zachary's breath caught. "Zara, are you sure? It has only been a day since. I have never been more sure of anything," she interrupted. "I am free, Zachary. Free to choose who I want to be with. Free to give myself to someone without fear or obligation. And I choose you. I have chosen you since the moment you knelt beside me at that water trough and asked who hurt me." He followed her into the room, closing the door behind them. What happened next was tender and careful, both of them treating each other like precious treasures. Zachary had been with women before, but never like this. Never with this overwhelming combination of love and reverence and desperate need. Afterwards, they lay tangled together, and Zachary marveled at the fact that this incredible woman was now truly his. "Marry me," he said into the darkness. "I know I asked before, but now you are actually free to say yes. Marry me, Zara. Let me spend the rest of my life loving you." "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you." They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Gila Bend, with Doc Morrison standing up as Zachary's witness and Martha, the town midwife, standing up for Zara. It was a simple ceremony, but to Zachary it was perfect. Zara wore a dress that Martha had helped her make, pale blue calico that brought out the color of her eyes, and she carried wildflowers they had gathered from the ranch that morning. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Zachary kissed his bride with all the love in his heart, and the small gathering of townspeople who had come to witness erupted in applause. There was a modest celebration at the saloon afterwards, with food and music and dancing. And for the first time since she had stumbled into town, Zara laughed without shadows in her eyes. That night, they returned to the ranch as husband and wife, and Zachary carried her over the threshold of the house that was now truly theirs. They made love in his bed, taking their time, learning each other's bodies with the knowledge that they had a lifetime ahead of them. In the months that followed, they built a life together that felt almost miraculous in its ordinary happiness. Zara proved to be a skilled rancher, working beside Zachary with the same determination she brought to everything. They expanded the herd, added more chickens, and planted a larger garden. The rope burns on Zara's neck faded to thin white scars that she stopped trying to hide, wearing them instead as marks of her survival and strength. They never heard from James Taylor again. Rumor had it he had left Arizona entirely, heading east to try his luck in New Orleans. Zachary hoped the man had learned something from the experience, though he doubted it. Some people were too consumed by their own darkness to change. A year after their wedding, Zara told Zachary she was pregnant. He was overcome with joy and terror in equal measure, worried about her safety but thrilled at the prospect of becoming a father. Zara laughed at his concerns and went about her work as usual, only slowing down in the final months when her belly grew too large to comfortably mount a horse. Their son was born on a cool April morning in 1887, with Doc Morrison and Martha in attendance. Zachary held his wife's hand through the whole difficult labor, marveling at her strength and courage. When he finally heard his son's first cry, he felt something shift in his heart, an expansion of love he had not known was possible. They named the boy William, after Zachary's father, and called him Will. He had his mother's hazel eyes and his father's dark hair, and from the moment he could walk, he followed Zachary everywhere, determined to learn the ranch. 2 years later, a daughter arrived, who they named Sarah for Zachary's mother. She was quieter than her brother, but just as determined, and she quickly wrapped both her parents around her tiny finger. Watching Zara with their children, seeing her laugh and play and love without reservation, Zachary was struck again and again by how fortunate he was. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Zachary and Zara stood on the porch of their ranch house watching the sunset paint the Arizona sky in shades of gold and crimson. Will and Sarah were playing in the yard, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. Zara leaned against Zachary's shoulder with a contented sigh. "Did you ever imagine this?" she asked softly. "When you first saw me stumble into town, did you imagine we would end up here?" Zachary thought about that day, about the frightened woman with rope burns around her neck and terror in her eyes. He thought about the rage he had felt, the deadly quiet of his voice when he asked who had hurt her. He thought about all the moments that had led them to this one, the fear and the fighting, the hope and the healing, the love that had grown between them like a desert flower after rain. "No," he admitted, "I did not imagine this, but I am grateful for every single moment that brought us here." Zara turned to kiss him, soft and sweet. "So am I. You saved my life, Zachary, and then you gave me a reason to live it." "We saved each other," he corrected gently. "You made this house a home again. You gave me purpose and love and a family. We saved each other, Zara." As the sun set and the stars began to emerge in the vast Arizona sky, they stood together on their porch, surrounded by the life they had built from pain and fear and hope. Their children played, their ranch thrived, and their love remained constant, a testament to the truth that even in the harshest wilderness, beauty could bloom. Years later, when Will and Sarah were grown with children of their own, they would ask their mother to tell them the story of how she and their father met. Zara would smile, touching the faint scars on her neck, and begin with the day she stumbled into Gila Bend more dead than alive. She would tell them about their father's quiet strength, the way his voice had gone deadly soft when he asked who had hurt her, the way he had fought for her freedom and loved her with a fierceness that had healed her broken soul. And she would end by saying what she had told Zachary on countless nights as they lay together in the darkness. That sometimes salvation came in unexpected forms, that love could grow in the harshest conditions, and that the scars we bear are not marks of shame, but badges of survival. She had been broken, but she had healed. She had been trapped, but she had been freed. And in the process, she had found a love that was worth every moment of pain it had taken to reach it. Zachary and Zara Yates lived long, full lives on their ranch in Arizona, surrounded by children and grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren. They worked the land together until age finally slowed them down, and even then they could be found sitting on their porch, hands entwined, watching the same sunsets they had watched for decades. When Zachary died at the age of 78, Zara grieved deeply but without regret. They had made every moment count. She followed him 2 years later, dying peacefully in her sleep in the bed they had shared for over 50 years. Their descendants gathered to lay them to rest side by side in the small cemetery outside Gila Bend, beneath headstones that bore simple inscriptions. But the real monument to their love was the thriving ranch they left behind, the family they had built, and the story that would be passed down through generations, a story of courage and survival, of deadly quiet rage transformed into protective love, of rope burns that faded but never completely disappeared, and of two people who had found each other in the darkest moment and built a life full of light.